Well, hello there, my friends. Here we are at the beginning of another week, the second full week of October, and I have got the great David Rothkopf joining me to talk about the death and destruction in Israel, where they have now declared war on Hamas after these unprecedented attacks. Rothkopf is the guy that I wanted to talk to today. I was so happy that he was available to me on Sunday evening, afternoon. We had a great discussion, and I'm going to try to recap a whole bunch of news around it, maybe a couple of other things, play some sound, and then we get to my conversation with David Rothkopf starting at 20 minutes in after the clips and news. But I hope you had a good weekend, and it began with the Friday job numbers, which were significantly more than Wall Street economists expected. The unemployment remained at 3.8% when the economy added 336,000 jobs in September. Economists had predicted the U.S. added 170,000 jobs last month and thought the unemployment rate would inch back down, and the market's continuing to predict that the Fed will hold rates steady in the next meeting. So that was your Friday morning. Friday night ended with my appearance on News Nation. I hope you caught that. I then did the audience warm-up at Last Week Tonight on HBO, which is a gig I do on the regular. John Oliver, great show on Sunday night. I hope you don't miss that one. Pretty much the smartest, funniest show on TV. I'm very happy to be working there and that the writer's strike is over. Yesterday turned out to be a crisp autumn day, and I needed to be outside. I hope you got outside, and send your vitamin N my way. standupwithpete@gmail.com. I was out there, got the pumpkins and the fall decorations up a bit. I'm building a nice little flower box in the front yard that's going to welcome spring flowers, something to look forward to, planting some bulbs in there. And I really enjoyed the beautiful autumn weather here in the Northeast, where it's been pretty rainy this last few weeks. Ready to begin another week with you. I'm very excited to meet a whole bunch of listeners for the first time on a Wednesday night in Pittsburgh, where I'll be co-headlining at City Winery with my friend J.L. Covan, who is set to join me here on the podcast tomorrow or Wednesday. Then I'm going to see Ava for the first time. Hopefully we're going to be able to make it work on Thursday at college. So I'm not sure about the hangout this week. We might be able to do it Friday night, but stay tuned for that. Of course, the world is watching what is happening in Israel right now over the weekend. Horrific attacks launched by Hamas. This is the way the New York Times had it yesterday. Nearly 50 years to the day after Yom Kippur War in 1973, Israel was again taken by surprise by a sudden attack. Unlike the series of clashes with Palestinian forces in Gaza over the past 3 years, this appears to be a full-scale conflict mounted by Hamas and its allies, with rocket barrages and incursions into Israel proper, and with Israelis captured and killed. At least 250 Israelis have been killed, officials said, and more than 1,400 injured. The Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza said that at least 313 Palestinians were killed and 1,990, almost 2,000, injured as Israeli forces launched retaliatory strikes and the two sides engaged in pitched battles. The psychological impact on Israelis has been compared to the shock of September 11th in America. So after the Israeli military repels the initial Palestinian attack, the question of what to do next will loom large. They say there are a few good options for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has declared war and is being pressured into a major military response. Given that scores of Israelis have died so far and an unknown number have been taken hostage by Hamas, an Israeli invasion of Gaza and even a temporary reoccupation of the territory, something that successive Israeli governments have tried hard to avoid, cannot be ruled out. Over the weekend, Israeli citizens were barricaded in their homes near the Gaza Strip. Some called into TV stations reporting in whispers that gunmen were moving door to door. Militants took several Israelis hostage, including children, according to the Israeli military. Hundreds fled an outdoor music festival in southern Israel to escape incoming rockets and gunfire. Hamas continued to fire rockets into Israel on Sunday morning. One struck Sderot, an Israeli city that was the site of intense fighting on Sunday. Israeli airstrikes, for their part, demolished 3 buildings. Did you see videos of these buildings just going down, collapsing, pancaking in Gaza, damaging a 4th, residents said. The streets of Gaza City emptied as residents took shelter at schools. The Israeli government said it had cut off the electricity supply for Gaza, which gets 2/3 of its power from Israel. After a late-night meeting, Israel's security cabinet announced that the goal of its operation in Gaza was to, quote, achieve the destruction of the military and governing capabilities of Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Here is President Biden with his Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, at his side over the weekend.
Afternoon.
Joe Biden.
Today, the people of Israel are under attack, orchestrated by a terrorist organization, Hamas. In this moment of tragedy, I want to say to them and to the world and to terrorists everywhere that the United States stands with Israel. We will not ever fail to have their back. We'll make sure that they have the help their citizens need and they can continue to defend themselves. You know, the world's seen appalling images. Thousands of rockets in the space of hours raining down on Israeli cities. When I got up this morning, started this at 7:30, 8 o'clock, my calls. Hamas terrorists crossing in Israel, killing not only Israeli soldiers, but Israeli civilians. In the street, in their homes. Innocent people murdered, wounded, entire families taken hostage by Hamas. Just days after Israel marked the holiest of days in the Jewish calendar. It's unconscionable. You know, when I spoke with Prime Minister Netanyahu this morning, I told him the United States stands with the people of Israel in the face of these terrorist assaults. Israel has the right to defend itself and its people. Full stop. There's never justification for terrorist attacks. And my administration's support for Israel's security is rock solid and unwavering.
All right, President Biden yesterday. You know what? Let me give you another 30 seconds. I just wanted to add this one more part that I grabbed for you from President Biden yesterday.
Let me say this as clearly as I can. This is not a moment for any party hostile to Israel to exploit these attacks to seek advantage. The world is watching.
So many important perspectives, so much context, so much sensitivity around the horror about all of this. But I do want to give you another perspective. This was on CNN's Fareed Zakaria's program. He invited Mustafa Barghouti, who is the leader of the Palestinian National Initiative from the West Bank, not affiliated, of course, with Hamas. This is a completely different organization. And I thought his nuanced yet pointed critique and explanation was worthy of sharing as well. Here's just about a minute and a half of that.
Just make sure that viewers understand that the Palestinian Authority has been an opponent of Hamas, so you are not in any way affiliated with Hamas. You represent the Palestinian Authority, which has control over parts of the West Bank. All that said, what is your reaction to what you have seen so far?
Well, first of all, I am not part of the Palestinian Authority. As a matter of fact, I represent a democratic Palestinian movement called Palestinian National Initiative, which is non-Fatah and non-Hamas. And we're of course, I am not affiliated with Hamas. But I think this situation that has evolved is a direct result of the continuation of the longest occupation in modern history. Israeli occupation of Palestinian land since 1967. This is 56 years of occupation that has transformed into a system of apartheid, a much worse apartheid than what prevailed in South Africa. Yes, maybe Hamas did not recognize Israel, but the PLO did, and the Palestinian Authority did. What did they get? Nothing. Since 2014, the Israeli governments would not even meet with Palestinians. And what you see today is a reaction to several things. First of all, settlers' terrorist attacks on Palestinians in the West Bank that has evicted already 20 communities in an act of ethnic cleansing. 248 Palestinians who were killed by the Israeli army and settlers in the West Bank, including 40 children. Attacks on the holy sites, the Muslim and Christian holy sites by Israeli extremists, as well as declaration of Netanyahu that he will liquidate the Palestinian rights and the Palestinian cause by normalization with Arab countries. And he dared even to go to the United Nations and carried in the United Nations a map of Israel, which included the whole of the West Bank, all of Gaza, all of Jerusalem, as well as the Golan Heights. He declared the annexation of the occupied territories. So, of course, Palestinians turned to resistance, because they see that this is the only way for them to get their rights. The question here is not about dehumanizing Palestinians as is happening and calling them terrorists. It's about asking the question, why the United States supports Ukraine in fighting what they call occupation, while here they are supporting the occupier who continues to occupy us.
Wow. Mustafa Barghouti. Not mixing words there. Or is it mincing words? Either way, I thought that was an interesting perspective. Of course, here at home, Republicans are criticizing the Biden administration and trying to connect unfreezing of Iranian money in a hostage trade to this attack somehow, as if we ourselves funded it with taxpayer money. Even former disgraced President Trump said in a speech over the weekend. I get more into that with David Rothkopf coming up. But here's presidential candidate, former South Carolina governor, and person with very little pride because she served as Donald Trump's U.S. ambassador to the UN. So she should know better than this, but here it is. Nikki Haley on Meet the Press with Kirsten Welker, one of many Republicans spinning the complete lie that this is our fault for unfreezing their money to get hostages and apparently funding the entire Hamas?
I want to drill down with you on some of those divisions. Yesterday, almost all of your Republican rivals blamed the Biden administration for this attack, as I just discussed with the secretary, citing the deal they made with Iran. You just saw the Secretary of State effectively say there is no link between that deal and the horrific attacks that unfolded yesterday. Do you think it was irresponsible of your rivals to level that allegation without any evidence or proof?
I actually think it was irresponsible for Secretary Blinken to say that the $6 billion doesn't weigh in here. I mean, let's be honest with the American people and understand that Hamas knows and Iran knows they're moving money around as we speak because they know $6 billion is going to be released. That's the reality. When I was at the United Nations, you saw that when those planes full of cash sent by Obama to Iran, I went to the International Atomic Energy Agency. I met with them. What happened was those funds were sent to Hezbollah in Lebanon. They were sent to Hamas in Gaza. They were sent to the Houthis in Yemen. They go and spread terrorism every time they get a dollar. It doesn't go to the Iranian people. It does go to terrorist attacks. And Secretary Blinken's just wrong to imply that this money is not being moved around as we speak
and yet,
to
Ambassador,
hurt those that love freedom.
And yet, Ambassador, there's just no proof of that yet. This is just the hours after that immediate attack. Is it irresponsible to level that charge when you really don't have any evidence of that at this point in time?
The evidence is, look at what the Iranian people have done to freedom-loving people around the world. Look at what the Iranian people, the Iranian regime has done to threaten Israel over the years. To think that they're not moving money around is irresponsible to say that to the American people. They are moving money around to threaten those they hate. They hate Israel. They hate America. They are going to continue to use this. It was wrong to release the $6 billion, but let me tell you what else was wrong. It was wrong to go and have that debacle in Afghanistan. It was wrong to waive sanctions on Iran that gave them even more money. Money has been flowing to Iran, and that is the problem, because when Iran gets money, they use it for hate.
And Ambassador Haley, just to be clear again, the Secretary of State said categorically they have not seen a link. Let me move on, though, to your record on Israel under the...
All right. Well, here is Fox News' Jennifer Griffin with one of many fact checks. She actually does a really good job and got a lot of credit for this because she's doing it on Fox News, where all these Republicans are making this criticism. She did the actual reporting. She often does. And here it is.
The White House has pushed back, as we've reported, on suggestions by Republican presidential candidates that the recent hostage deal that involved the release of $6 billion contributed to the Hamas attack. The $6 billion is still currently held in a Qatari bank account with U.S. Treasury oversight. The money came from Iranian oil sales to South Korea and did not include U.S. taxpayer dollars. NSC spokesperson Adrian Watson said in a statement, quote, "Not a single cent from these funds has been spent yet, and when it is spent, it can only be spent on things like food and medicine for the Iranian people. These funds have absolutely nothing to do with the horrific attacks today, and this is not the time to spread disinformation."
And here is more. This is from the horse's mouth. This is the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, trying to clear this up as well.
Fortunate that some are, in effect, saying things that may be motivated by politics at a time when so many lives have been lost and Israel remains under attack. And the facts are these, and should be well known. This involved Iranian resources, not American taxpayer dollars. These were resources that Iran had acquired from the sale of its oil that were stuck in a bank, in this case in South Korea. They have always been entitled to use those funds under our law and under our sanctions for humanitarian purposes. And The funds were moved from one bank to another to facilitate that. By the way, not a single dollar from that account has actually been spent to date. And in any event, it's very carefully and closely regulated by the Treasury Department to make sure that it's only used for food, for medicine, for medical equipment. So some who are advancing this false narrative, they're either misinformed or they're misinforming. And either way, it's wrong.
All right, just a few clips around the issue, and we're going to hear, obviously, a lot more, and I'm sure more Republicans making that now widely debunked argument about the $6 billion. You're going to be hearing that one over and over, I'm sure, this week. The other thing you're going to be hearing about this week, obviously, is that the Republicans are going to be looking for a Speaker of the House, and so I thought it was interesting that Nancy Mace was on CBS's Face the Nation yesterday, where Margaret Brennan asked her about one of the likely candidates for Speaker of the House, Jim Jordan. Because I've been wondering this a lot as well. And if CBS and Margaret Brennan are vetting these allegations against Jim Jordan that he was witness to and knew about the assault of wrestlers at Ohio State while he was there, is that going to come up? And as a reminder, here from a year ago, former Ohio State wrestling captain, a guy named Adam D. Sabato, testifying in the Ohio House that Jim Jordan, quote, called me crying, begging me for half an hour to cover up hundreds of sex abuse allegations in the program he was coaching. Here is that clip from the Ohio State House testimony last year.
This is disgusting. You people have the power to do something. Ohio State is too arrogant. They think it's going to go away. Jim Jordan called me crying, groveling on the 4th of July, begging me to go against my brother. Begging me, crying for a half hour. That's the kind of cover-ups that's going on there. Now, you guys can sit and act like it's not going on, but I got a lot of other stuff here. Emails that were taken out of my mailbox. That's a crime.
And now here is Nancy Mace on TV on Sunday acting like she had no idea about these allegations. And now this guy is potentially going to be the Speaker of the House. I mean, we haven't even gotten started on him being a election denier and our insurrectionist. Again, great work by CBS News, Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation.
I know you've been outspoken about defending victims of sexual assault. Do the past allegations against Jim Jordan that he turned a blind eye to sexual abuse give you any reservations?
I'm not familiar or aware with that. He's not indicted on anything that I'm aware of, and so I don't know anything and can't speak to that. But I will say that I have been, as you said, Margaret, I don't know anything, and I don't know anything about that. What I do know is that I've been a very strong voice for women. I've talked to Jim Jordan and Steve Scalise about that. I've been a very strong advocate for rape victims. As you mentioned earlier, the Judiciary Committee, with him as chairman, recently passed a rape kit bill that Barbara Lee and I are working on. And those are the facts and the data that I have to work with, and I've had a very positive experience with him in that regard.
So we will see what happens this week in Capitol Hill. They're apparently going to just lock the doors and try to come out with a speaker. And I might do a flash Zoom hangout if they do. Stay tuned for that. Well, let's get to my conversation with David Rothkopf, which is real good. But before I do, what to watch for this week, of course, it is Columbus Day, or as I like to celebrate, Indigenous Peoples Day, along with quite a few other states that recognize that. The Nobel Prize for Economics is going to be announced today. Liberia holds elections Tuesday. House Republicans hold a party vote Tuesday as well to nominate a speaker, so that's going to be Tuesday. New Zealand is set to hold elections this coming Saturday. And a solar eclipse will pass over the United States on Saturday from Oregon to Texas. Hey, if it's your birthday this week, happy birthday, and whatever else you're celebrating. Reach out to me, let me know, standupwithpete@gmail.com. And now let's get to David Rothkopf. When I saw what was happening in Israel, he was the first guy I wanted to reach out to because, of course, he's a foreign policy, national security, political affairs guy, commentator, analyst, founder and CEO of the Rothkopf Group, deep state radio host, Daily Beast, columnist, author of several books, knows a lot of people, knows a lot of things, and one of the most thoughtful, intelligent guys that I talk to about anything, but certainly about foreign policy, national security, and that is what this absolutely is, as always, influenced by domestic politics. David Rothkopf joins me right now.
David Rothkopf joins me now. He was my top choice. I really wanted to talk to you, and then I saw that you put out a really important piece for the Daily Beast. Thank you for joining me as always, my friend.
It's a pleasure to see you.
I think I just wanted to start by talking about some of the reactions that you have in this piece, which is that, number one, this was a very complex attack, and number two, it caught Israel completely unawares, and in many respects, you write, unprepared, and I guess I just don't understand how that can be, because I'm told it's like the most surveilled place. They've got all kinds of fencing and everything. Like, how could this have happened?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think number one is this was, a horrific terrorist attack. And we now have over 700 Israelis dead, thousands wounded, hundreds now of Palestinians dead. And we can anticipate that over the course of the next few weeks, we're going to see more carnage. And so, there is no minimizing that. And I say it because sometimes when one starts to do the analysis, how did we get here? People, particularly people who are close to the tragedy, will say, this is not the time to have that discussion. Now, I think to some extent it is the time, because you had here the biggest failure of the Israeli security establishment since the Yom Kippur War. And, by the metrics of some people, even more, even greater than that.
They're kind of like Israel's Pearl Harbor, I think I read. I don't know if that's...
Some people have said that. Some people have said it's Israel's 9/11. A friend of mine with whom I was speaking said, no, it's not really like that, because you could have predicted this in a way that It was harder to predict those things.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And I think that's why the security breakdown is so great. You're right. There's a huge infrastructure in these things. And so the tradecraft of the Palestinians in keeping this secret, whether that meant that they had small compartmentalized groups that didn't speak to one another, whether that meant, that they didn't, one person participating in one aspect of this had no idea what the other aspects were, or something else, we don't know. And I think some Israelis, and, I think it's important to note that Israel is in a very riven, divided political situation at the moment.
Yeah.
Feel that the prime minister and his right-wing cabinet were so focused on judicial reform, so focused on sort of undermining democracy, so focused on their extreme views of what they should do in the West Bank, that they stopped focusing on this.
Yeah.
They dropped their guard. And I think, it's really noteworthy that in Israel, as people are horrified by the deaths of grandmothers, of children, of spouses, of 260 participants at a music festival not too far from the Gaza border, they're still angry. They're incensed at Hamas and the terrorists, but they thought they were safe. And I think one of the things that's going to happen in the course of addressing what happened yesterday is an effort by Israel and by Israel's allies to make them feel safe again.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, there are some parallels in terms of, like, thinking 9/11. We were horrified and obviously very angry and all of the emotions at Al-Qaeda, but we were also eventually pretty angry at the Bush administration and our intelligence agencies. And my friend Ali Soufan was pretty mad at the CIA for not sharing information between the CIA and FBI. The point being, while you can be horrified and angry at the terrorists, you can also blame the leadership. And as you say, I was just shocked by this. The reporting, what's going on there. The Israeli army apparently warned Netanyahu for months that his push for government overhaul put Israel at great risk of multi-front attack. You write, the quote is, he dismissed their warnings by accusing the military of joining the left-wing protesters against him. His ministers said the army could go to hell. When I read that quote, I was like, well, that's a lot worse than, bin Laden is determined to attack on a presidential daily briefing.
It's absolutely right. And again, there is no justification for terrorism. There is no justification for the slaughter of innocents. That said, this administration in Israel was systematically planning to dismantle settlements in the West Bank, had embraced an incredibly racist point of view towards the Palestinians.
Yeah.
And, I think it's disingenuous and inappropriate to say, well, that had nothing to do with it. Or we are entitled to do that. We can treat the Palestinians any way we want. They don't have any right to act out. Do they have a right to terrorism? No, they don't. I want to be very clear about that. They don't have the right to do that. But, if you're trying to make your country safe, you need to understand why these things happen.
And yes, exactly. And I appreciate the nuance and the caveats that you keep offering. It's important because we don't want to be, seen as not having that full view and blaming the right people here. But the reaction or lack of protection, you write in your piece that I think it's fair to say we should all be more concerned with the fate of the people of Israel and the Palestinian territories than that of their governments, both of which continue to serve their people abysmally. So let's look at Hamas and let's look at the alliances that have changed a lot. I feel like that's, this is an unprecedented attack in every way, but also one of the big ways is the relationships in the Middle East and the alliances have changed. Why did Hamas say so far? What's the reporting say as to why now and why this type of attack?
Well, there have been a lot of things, and we're right now in a particularly chaotic moment. There was a statement by Hezbollah, which is also an Iran-backed terrorist group based in Lebanon, that said this sends a message to people in the region who are attempting to normalize relations with Israel, which means to the Saudis. Right. I think the Palestinians were legitimately concerned that an Israel-Saudi normalization deal would essentially throw them under the bus.
Right.
Because Netanyahu said by this far-right administration, he wasn't going to be able to make real concessions, certainly not get you anywhere into the zip code of a two-state solution. And the Saudis, who were supposed to be the protectors of the Palestinian interests in all of this, looked like they were more interested in getting the security deal, civilian nuclear weapons, help with addressing the problem from Iran, than they were standing up for Palestinian rights. And they might accept a deal which didn't really do that. Of course, the Iranians were threatened by this deal. They fund Hamas. Hamas is their proxy. So they, had an incentive to do this. But again, we're so deep into the tangled history of Israel and the Palestinians that when you start trying to figure out why this happened now, you have 80 years of history. You have the horrific conditions in Gaza. You have the corruption of Hamas and the terrible leadership of Hamas. You have the history of terrorism and elevating that as an option, although it should not, of course, be an option. You have the mistreatment of people in Gaza. You have the Iranian factor. And, I think over the next couple of weeks, we're going to examine some of these things more closely. Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday said, well, people should leave Gaza because when the Israelis come in, it's going to be carnage and they're going to reduce Gaza to rubble. Well, there's something profoundly disingenuous in that statement. They can't leave Gaza. The border that they have with Egypt, the Egyptians keep closed off. The rest of the border with Israel, the Israelis keep closed off. There's nowhere to go. And so, we've got to watch closely because in the past, brutal, unprovoked, unjustifiable attacks against Israelis result in overkill against Palestinians. And again, does that justify killing people? No, it doesn't. It does not justify what Hamas does. But if we want to get to peace, we need to understand history and the cycles involved.
Yeah, and that's a long history and, as you said, tangled. I got a text from one friend who said, listen, I paid close enough attention to Arab-Israeli conflict over the years to know that the Palestinians, regardless of who you want to blame, they're in these conflicts, they always lose a lot more people. And so this looks like suicide. I mean, this kind of attack is guaranteed to get the type of response that you read about in your piece that we've seen before, that leadership is guaranteeing. It's guaranteed, well, not guaranteed, but to, get the leadership of Hamas, kill or capture them. So, what do you think of people who can't understand why the Palestinians would do this, knowing that they were going to get it a lot worse as always?
Well, let me ask you a provocative question. And I really, I don't mean any disrespect with the question to anybody. What if you lived in the most crowded place on earth, were not allowed to leave, did not have rights, 97% of the drinking water was not drinkable, there was no actual economy, and the power that was imposing that on you showed no signs of relenting?
Yep.
That negotiations hadn't helped, that your government wasn't really particularly good at advocating for your views, that you saw your kids hungry, you may have seen friends and relatives hurt in the past. What would you do?
Fully understand. I've thought about it for years. I've read all about it. I know a lot of folks who have reported on it or live there, not so much Gaza, but the West Bank. And I remember reading about kid gets into college, Palestinian kid, can't go, can't leave. Can't get stuff in either. That's another big issue. Like, you can't get potato chips at one point because there's so many different reasons why you can't get things in. You can't get health care. Maybe your kid is sick. And I know that they make exceptions. I'm not saying this is always the case, that the Israelis always do this, but I fully see your point. And I feel like I've always seen the point. So I guess what you're saying is the reason for why they would commit these types of heinous attacks is because their living conditions have been so dire for so long, and obviously perceive that to be.
They don't think there's a plan B. Should there be a plan B? Yes.
Yeah.
So show me the progress that's been made in peace talks. Show me how much closer they're to their own sovereignty. Again, if my wife or daughter or brother or best friend were killed yesterday, I wouldn't care about this if I were an Israeli.
Right.
I want revenge.
Yeah.
That's what Americans wanted.
Well,
but think about it. 9/11, nearly 3,000 people were killed in the World Trade Center. What did we do?
Well, I think that's different, because I did not want revenge. I wanted to understand why that was.
You didn't want revenge.
Well, but
we launched a war that killed 600,000 Iraqi civilians. And there is not an American out there, or a mainstream political unit out there in our society that questions that as it should be questioned.
Questions which part?
That our response was overkill.
Oh, right. Yeah, no, I mean, of course. And
by the way, overkill is the formula behind the Intifada. If you have a Palestinian child throw a rock at an Israeli tank, and the Israeli tank responds with its machine guns against the child, and there's a TV camera nearby, even if the child dies, it can be seen to be a political victory for the Palestinians, because it shows brutality and overkill. And, that has been part of the formulation behind a lot of these terrorist attacks. A lot of people I've spoken to in Israel go, no, this is different. This is the worst we've ever had.
Yeah.
This is I saw a tweet today. This is the most Jews killed in a single day since the Holocaust. That this is grave, and it may change the politics of it. I don't know. We're going to have to watch carefully. It is profoundly dangerous situation. I also see that there are people out there, my first thought was that this would sort of delay this Israel-Saudi deal. But almost immediately, Israelis and Saudis and others close to the deal are like, no, we have to proceed forward with this deal because otherwise the terrorists win. although, I think there are a lot of problems with doing that deal. So we are at a moment of great uncertainty where you can understand why both sides would seek more brutality, and people of conscience in the world need to look at it and say, how do we avoid the brutality? How do we find our way to peace? And people who care about Israel need to say, how do we restore security, understand what went wrong, and fix it?
Yeah. Well, speaking of people of good conscience, the Republican reaction here at home, I want to talk a little bit about the American reaction. I've seen two types of reactions where, one, they're talking all about the money that the United States negotiated to unfreeze in the hostage trade. That's been debunked. I've already played on this podcast before we talked Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, debunking that $6 billion. They're saying this is Biden's fault because he gave money, taxpayer money now, they're even saying, you write about this in the Daily Beast piece, to the Iranians. The Iranians gave it to, and basically we're funding the war. Of course, that isn't true. And the other reaction I've seen, you shared this on Twitter just to talk about how vile it is. Donald Trump Jr. and others. I saw this longtime conservative real nut job that I used to debate on TV. Amy Kremer tweeting, look what's happening in Israel. Don't think it can't happen here. And Junior said something similar. We have no idea who comes across the southern border. No guarantee we don't have sleeper cells in this country. Biden's government is too busy going after grandma, Catholics, PTA moms and dads, and Trump supporters. And my point, my rage is, if we want to look at who's attacking America, where the terrorists are, it's not really foreign terrorists. It's Americans, and it's people like Don Jr. and Amy Kremer who are creating these types of, I think, atmospheres for those attacks. They happen all the time in America. I'm done talking.
Well, look, in the words of the patriarch in Succession, these are not serious people. They are lying to advance their political interests, and they're doing so at the expense of the interests of the United States and the people they supposedly represent or seek to represent. And, of course, this lie about the $6 billion is a lie. The money hasn't even been distributed yet. So, and there were a ton of provisions that when it's distributed, it won't go towards this kind of thing. This notion that people say, well, we've got to support Israel because whatever the evangelical justification for supporting Israel is. And that also means, these terrorists that cross their border could cross our border.
Yeah.
I mean, how far up your ass does your head have to be to suggest that you are going to have, as happened yesterday, hundreds of people going across the shared border between Gaza and Israel, and suggest that that's going to happen at the southern border of the United States? It means you don't care about reality. You just have a hot button issue, and you want to get to that hot button issue. You want to find a way to blame this administration and somehow make the absurd calculus that if people get across our border, that means we are responsible for the attack that happened yesterday. I mean, what insanity. And so, but I have to tell you, I turned on the news yesterday, had it on all day long, was watching all of my favorite pretty progressive media outlets. Mm-hmm. And every 15 minutes, somebody brought this up. Every 15 minutes, they said, well, what about the $6 billion? Do you think that's a serious critique? And I was like, what the fuck are they doing? This is not true. Why bring it up?
It's such a connect the dots easy thing to do. I saw it right away, and it's the easiest one, and they're echoing it everywhere. Trump, of course, said, this never would happen if I was president. Hamas never would have dared to do that if I was president.
And Andy said in his Truth Social statement on this that this was U.S. taxpayer dollars.
Right.
Which just goes even a step further. It's not the money that the Iranians were getting back, which was the Iranians' money, which is held in a bank account in Qatar and monitored and so forth. It wasn't even that. It was like, no, it was our tax dollars. It wasn't our tax. There are no tax dollars going to Iran.
Yeah, we'll see we'll see the rest of the week what kind of things we hear from Republicans.
We're going to see complete insanity.
Yeah.
You've got a Republican speaker race in which both candidates were January 6th defenders, and both candidates don't think we should support Ukraine. And it's like, oh, so wait a second. We should support Israel because of the national security threat the Palestinians pose to us, which is zero, but not Ukraine because of the national security threat that the country with the most nuclear weapons in the world, Russia, poses to us, which is enormous.
Right.
This is just ridiculous. And as I have said frequently, the race that we're going to see for Speaker of the House pits bubonic plague against Ebola virus. It's like, what do you want to choose in that race?
And then just malaria steps in and says, you could survive me.
That's when this guy, when Cantor Kemper, whatever his name was, dropped out, I said, hantavirus just dropped out. But it's, these people are not serious. They are dangerous to us. If they're concerned about U.S. national security, let's start with the most imminent threat to the U.S. and the West and fund Ukraine.
What do you make of the Biden administration, Secretary of State Antony Blinken reaction to this? They seemingly came out full-throated defense of Israel. By the way,
that is completely, look, that's the only reaction that's possible. They have long said that we stand by Israel. That makes complete sense. This kind of an act is the moment that real allies step up. They have handled this with real seriousness. They've all been in the White House. They've been tracking the information. The president made a statement in the morning. He then made a public statement in the afternoon. Blinken has been on the Sunday morning shows. And I would say, I think Tony Blinken is an excellent Secretary of State. One of the reasons I think is he started talking about this in human terms. Right. And he started talking about the human loss here, and that's what's really important. And I think that was the main point that I wanted to make in the article yesterday, which is this is not something abstract that is taking place, in a video game. Mothers, fathers, children, grandparents were going about their lives, having a nice day, and horror entered it. Death entered it. Families were torn apart. And our real interest should not be about political sloganeering. It should be about caring for other people.
And in general, the reaction, I feel, our friend Wajad Ali captured it when he said, you should be horrified by the attack on Israeli civilians and condemn it as war crimes. You should be horrified by a brutal occupation that commits daily crimes against humanity in Gaza. This is all connected. Your empathy and compassion should be able to acknowledge it all. I feel like we really get into our sides.
I totally agree. And I've seen so many people who I normally like, who I really admire, who are saying things like, you can't criticize the Israelis in any way. You have to support whatever they do. They should have free license to do whatever they want to the Palestinians. Don't talk to us about the reasons for all of this. And it is that silence about these reasons that is why this has gone on for 80 years. And the appropriate response is to rethink our positions in a way that is founded more in a philosophy of common humanity.
Very well said. I'm so glad that you were available to talk to me today. I was planning on talking to you this week about our broken Congress, your great piece. MAGA always wanted this, but when this happened, I really wanted to reach out to you because I knew you'd have the thoughtful nuance that you had in the article and in our conversation. I look forward to hearing what you're going to do this week on Deep State Radio. Any plans that you'll be?
We're going to do we call it an emergency podcast on this on tomorrow with former senior advisor to Israeli governments, Ilan Pincus, and Palestinian journalist Rula Jabriel.
Oh, I know and like her. She's tough. When approximately does that drop? Do you have any idea?
Tomorrow afternoon.
Thank you.
Monday afternoon.
I'm looking forward to hearing that, and I really appreciate you joining me today, sir. Thank you.
My pleasure. See you soon, Pete.
All right, David Rothkopf joining me there. Of course, as always, listen to him at Deep State Radio. Follow him on all the social medias. Get his books and let him know that you heard him here on Stand Up. So great. Thank you very much for stopping by, pressing play, subscribing, maybe with a paid subscription for as little as $5 or more anytime. You can raise that up if you'd like to pay more. If you're listening to 5 shows a week, say, what's it worth to you? Because it's worth everything to me. This is my full-time gig, and I can't do it without your support. While it's free, it is actually not cheap. I put a lot into it each and every day. Thank you very much for listening, and let me know who you want to hear on the show, what you want to hear me talking with somebody about, or anything else you need at all. How about that? All right. Email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com, and I will talk to you tomorrow, if not sooner. John Carroll, take us out.
Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. And even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be told up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.